The American Civil War had ended, but the country was not at peace. Tribal conflicts raged on the western frontier. Laws were weak and the land was fraught with danger. It was at this time that history's forgotten heroes emerged, the Buffalo Soldiers. These units of black American soldiers were officially formed in 1866. But why did these newly freed men join the army? Was their assignment a reward or a new test? And the question is, why has history often ignored these soldiers? Let's witness the unknown story of the Buffalo Soldiers together. When the American Civil War ended in 1865, slavery was officially over on paper. But the word freedom remained uncertain for millions of black Americans. The chains had been broken, yes, but the walls of society still stood tall. They couldn't find work, nor could they build a secure life. Most were still forced to work on their former owners. Plantations in the post-war South, often facing hunger, violence, and despair. It was at this very moment that a new path emerged, joining the army. And this path would carry them into the unforgettable pages of history. Imagine, it's 1866. Just a few years ago, you were a slave. Now you are free, but the world around you still sees you as a stranger. There are no jobs in town, and everywhere you go, you are told, you can't work here. Yeah, suddenly, you hear the army is forming new units. Uniforms, a steady paycheck, hot meals, shelter, maybe even respect. So, what would you do? Would you take this chance? Thousands of black Americans answered yes to this very question. They were the soldiers who would later be known as the Buffalo Soldiers. 4 African American units were created by an act of Congress in 1866, 9th and 10th. Cavalry regiments, 24th and 25th Infantry regiments. This was a first in American history, because black Americans were no longer only in volunteer units, but were now a permanent part of the regular army. But it is important to remember, this was not as simple as it seems. Wearing a uniform did not mean equality. They were still considered second-class citizens, sent on the toughest, most dangerous missions, carrying the heaviest burden under the command of white officers. So it was not only a military service, but also a struggle for survival and self-assertion. So why did these soldiers get the name Buffalo Soldiers? According to legend, the Native Americans they encountered compared their hair to the fur of bison. But it wasn't just about looks. Their fighting determination, endurance, and never backing down attitude were identified with the strength of the bison. Thus the nickname was born, and over time it was proudly adopted. The name was no longer just a metaphor, but an identity. Now stop and think for a moment. These soldiers were both ostracized by white Americans and not accepted by the Native Americans they had to fight. So they were living a life caught between two sides. On the one hand, a country promised freedom, and on the other, facing blood and death every day. This contradiction makes the story of the Buffalo Soldiers even more dramatic, even more striking, because they were not only soldiers, they were also symbols of a forgotten people's struggle for freedom. But there is something else that makes this story special. The Buffalo Soldiers played a critical role in America's westward expansion. They guarded roads on the western frontier, defended settlers, fought gangs, clashed with tribes. So the fate of an entire era is in their hands. But let me ask you, isn't it strange that you have never seen their names in any history book? The aim of this documentary is to bring these forgotten heroes back to light. Now I want to take you into the atmosphere of that period. Dusty roads, endless steps, narrow passages through which caravans pass, and the black cavalry patrolling those passages at the first light of the morning. Their uniforms are not always immaculate, sometimes patched, sometimes worn, but the determination is in their eyes. Because they were defending not only America's borders, but their very existence. Yes, this journey will not be easy. The story of the Buffalo Soldiers is as much about pain as heroism, loneliness as pride, sacrifice as victory. But rest assured, as you listen, you will admire their courage and ask, why haven't these names found their rightful place in history books? If you're ready, let's take a real-time travel to post-1866. America and the birth of the Buffalo Soldiers. Through dusty roads, war cries, hopes and disappointments, let's begin to follow their trail. The story of the Buffalo Soldiers was intertwined with America's westward expansion. With the ruins of the Civil War still fresh, the government wanted to control the western territories, provide security for new settlers, and protect the railroads. But these tasks were not easy. The boundless prairies, mountains, and deserts of the West were home not only to nature but also to Native American tribes that were still resisting. And the burden of this difficult task often fell on the shoulders of the Buffalo Soldiers. The tasks assigned to them were of a kind that most white units avoided. Endless patrols, defenses against attacks, months-long shifts at remote outposts. They battled the scorching heat of summer and the freezing cold of winter. Often food was scarce, shelter inadequate. Yet they did not give up. Because for these soldiers, this duty was not just a job. It was also a way to prove their honor. Imagine, one day you're patrolling the prairie for miles on horseback. You see a cloud of dust on the horizon? Perhaps a caravan has been attacked. Perhaps a call for help has come from a village. After days of pursuit, you come across the trail of a small gang. Often the battle erupts in an instant. It was in those moments that the Buffalo Soldiers' discipline and courage came to the fore. Even if they were outnumbered, they could repel the enemy with their resilience. But remember, Native Americans weren't the only enemy these soldiers fought. Sometimes they battled outlaw gangs, sometimes renegade soldiers, and sometimes prejudice within their own army. Yes, you heard right. Despite wearing uniforms, white commanders and soldiers still viewed them as second-class citizens, sometimes imposing the harshest punishments on them and assigning them the most dangerous tasks. So, the Buffalo Soldiers had to fight both the enemy outside and the discrimination within. Nevertheless, their achievements were too great to be ignored. The 9th and 10th Cavalry Regiments gained great fame in the West, especially in the 1870s. They not only repelled enemy attacks, but also brought order to newly established towns. They protected railroad construction and secured postal routes. In short, the security of America's gateway to the West was largely ensured thanks to them. So, how did the public view them? This is where it gets a little complicated. Many settlers survived and had their property protected thanks to the Buffalo Soldiers. Some were grateful to them, but at the same time, due to the racist prejudices of the era, they did not receive the respect they deserved. Their achievements were rarely mentioned in newspapers, and their names were kept in the background in official records. So it's no coincidence that we don't hear their names in history books. It was a deliberate act of forgetting. And the most striking part is this: the Buffalo Soldiers would not only serve within American borders, but would also leave their mark as part of the American Army in various wars, from Cuba to the Philippines. So their story was not limited to the West. They left a global legacy. But for now, we are focusing on the period after 1866, because the early years of their existence were the ones that shaped them the most, the years that defined their character. Now let's try to imagine the atmosphere of that period a little more clearly. You are in a small outpost on the frontier. Wooden barracks, muddy roads, wind blowing day and night. The soldiers' faces are tired, but there is a sparkle in their eyes. They know that this mission is not just an order. It is a legacy they will leave to future generations. And perhaps without realizing it, they are writing one of the most important but least known stories of heroism in American history. Yes, that was the formative period of the Buffalo Soldiers, a struggle forged through hardship, surrounded by prejudice but stubbornly persevering. You will see in the next step that the sacrifices of these soldiers left deep marks not only on the battlefield but also on the future of society. And these marks have not yet been fully explored, even today. That is why their story is important not only for understanding the past but also for understanding the present. The story of the Buffalo Soldiers was not limited to victories won on the battlefield. Their real struggle was the silent but determined fight they waged for equality in American society. Because these soldiers represented the American flag when they wore their uniforms, but when they took off their uniforms, they were still treated as second-class citizens. This contradiction was one of the most important factors that shaped the Buffalo Soldiers' destiny. Think about it. You risk your life on the battlefield, you do your job to the best of your ability, even your commanders admire your courage. But when you return to town, the restaurants you can sit in are limited. There are no hotels you can enter. And sometimes they even refuse to serve you. What kind of justice is that? There was no answer to this question. But the Buffalo Soldiers did not give up. Because for them, this mission was not just individual salvation, but a legacy to be left for future generations. Over time, their achievements became impossible to ignore. By the end of the 19th century, some Buffalo Soldiers had earned medals for bravery. These medals, the highest honor in the US Army, officially recognized the heroism of black soldiers. Yet even these medals did not eliminate the discrimination they faced in daily life. So we can say that the Buffalo Soldiers were both heroes and victims. They were both a symbol of pride and proof of inequality. But there was one truth that set them apart: loyalty. They remained loyal to a country that often excluded them, because they knew that their courage and sacrifice on the battlefield would one day open society's eyes and change the pages of history. And they were right. Years later, when the civil rights movement rose, the contributions of black people in the army became one of the strongest arguments, the legacy of the Buffalo. Soldiers even indirectly empowered the struggle for equality, envisioned by Martin Luther King. So, do you know what the most striking part of this whole story was? The Buffalo Soldiers were hailed as heroes while fighting, yet at the same time they were left to be forgotten. Their names did not appear in the lines of history books for many years. However, local stories, memories, and military archives preserved their existence. If we can tell this story today, it is thanks to the traces they left behind silently. Now imagine, riding horses on the dusty roads of the West, a crimson sunset in the sky. The sound of guns echoes in the distance, the patrol continues. And a group of black cavalrymen, flags in their hands, determination in their eyes. They are fighting not just for that moment, but for the future. Perhaps their names will be forgotten, but the legacy they left behind will live on for generations. That is the story of the Buffalo Soldiers, an invisible struggle, but a mark that will never fade. In conclusion, the Buffalo Soldiers teach us this: freedom can sometimes be nothing more than a word on paper. But what makes it real is the courage and resistance of people. They were the honor struggle of a people freed from their chains but still chained by society. And today they still remind us that heroism is sometimes written not with applause, but with silence and patience. Yes, the Buffalo Soldiers may have been left in the shadows of history, but knowing their story is necessary not only to understand the past, but also to question the present. Because every society has a duty to remember its true heroes. The story of the Buffalo Soldiers is one of America's most painful, proud, and striking lessons. The story of the Buffalo. Soldier shows us that true heroes often remain in the shadows of history. The hardships they endured, the struggles they fought, and the legacy they left behind continue to inspire us today. If you enjoyed listening to this journey with me, you can subscribe to the channel to discover more forgotten stories like this, and support me by liking the video or leaving a comment. Your support is truly invaluable in keeping this kind of content going. In the next video, we'll uncover another hidden page of history together. That's all from me for now. Take care, see you soon.